Hey everybody, this is Matthew Perry here. Wow, been straightening out my office, and so my apologies already for how this looks, but I wanted to spend some time talking to all of you and telling you about the black hole of burnout. I've noticed this over the years, and again, I've been in ministry for a good while, and I've been noticing this over the years, that when we begin to do this black hole of burnout, it usually begins in ways that are very admirable. For instance, especially if you have a servant mentality, what happens? You see a need that's there. You see a need that's there, and you want to serve. You want to fill in that hole. You want to be able to help out, and you do. And then you see another need and another need and another need. You love Jesus. You love the Word. You love the church. You want to be sure that you're helping all of those holes to be filled. Well, what ends up happening? Well, if you happen to be in a medium-sized church, like mine, at least Colorado medium-sized, we have about 200 people coming to our church. Oftentimes, the Pareto principle can kick in. What do I mean? Well, the Pareto principle is basically that 20% of the people do 80% of the work. And that can fluctuate. Sometimes it's 25, sometimes it's only 15. But 20% of the people end up doing about 80% of the work. And if you end up finding some very faithful people that are able to do it, if you as a leader aren't careful, you can get these people going here and here and here. And for a while, they're able to sustain it. But soon, all of their week is taken up with activities and meetings and meetings and activities and activities and meetings. And before you know it, you may find yourself with a bunch of leaders that are getting very, very close to burnout. And the steps are very, very clear. One happens to be is that, again, they see a need. But then the frustration begins to come because they may see other people that aren't doing as much as they are, and they get frustrated because they aren't taking care of the business that they feel like they should be. They're not being as active as they are. And so frustration begins to set in. Resentment can set in with your fellow church members. And so because they're not doing all that they should be, because you're killing yourself and you're seeing your other leaders killing themselves in the Lord's work. And so then it begins to move to resentment, to frustration. And I read an article the other day that when this burnout begins, what happens is they begin to disengage. And sometimes they can just disengage from various meetings and various teams. Or a lot of times what can happen is they begin to disengage from the church and believe that they just need to start over. And so burnout, the opposite of burnout is engagement, because you're filled. And that's another thing that we need to look at, is that what happens when all these team activities and all of these other meetings are going on during the week? What begins to suffer? Well, what begins to suffer is family. Your family begins to suffer because a lot of times they believe that you are now more committed to that activity and that ministry than you are to them. And you can make the case for that because, well, I'm serving Jesus and Jesus is more important and we want to see people grow and we want to see people come to Christ. Yeah, but we're forgetting about the most important discipleship group that we have, and that's our own family. And we begin to become disjointed from them. Well, what about your time with the Lord? Well, my goodness, if you're so busy doing stuff at church, what ends up happening is you begin to disengage from the things of God, and that spiritual tank isn't filled up. And then you begin to realize that these boundaries that you were supposed to have set, you said you were going to set, you're not setting. And if you've forgotten how to say no to the good things, to where you can be able to say yes to the things that are in accordance with your gifting. And so this burnout begins, and it's just tragic. And you as a leader, if you happen to be a leader of a church, you've got to realize and begin to see these marks that are coming up. If you begin to see a lot of your certain people in your church, now all of a sudden they're getting involved in 3, 4, 5, 6 different teams, 3, 4, 5, 6 different things. And you are going to be tempted to say, man, I'm glad that there's someone that's faithful. But you better see the long term. What's the long term going to be? The long term is going to be they are going to flame out and burn out. And if they can't say no to things, then there may be times when you're going to have to come up and say, you're going to have to say no for them. You've got to think long term. Yes, there's a lot of stuff that needs to get done now, but you have got to think long term, not only for that person's sake, but for the church's sake, and for you as a leader's sake. Because suddenly you're basically, if people keep going at that pace, they may be able to last 1, 2, or at most 3 years, and then they're done. So what can you do about it? Well, one of the things you can do is to make sure that you are setting boundaries for your people. And this is very difficult. The smaller the church that you have, this is where it's going to be difficult, because there's so many things that you see that may need to get done, and you're going to need to populate all of these things that you may think need to get done. You're going to have to evaluate whether those things are crucial or whether they're just really good things to be done. If they're just simply good or okay things, or things that may have been passed down and that there's not a real good reason to continue them, there's not a real good vision behind it, then what do? You may have to just let it go over time. Making sure you're talking to your leaders, though, as that's happening, and you don't want to just cut it, because there's always people that are going to be sold out and involved in those ministries. But if you can come to them and you can make the case, then you're able to simplify and you're able to streamline and you're able to focus on some things. And secondly, when you begin to talk about your leaders and getting them involved, your people don't need to be on any more than 2 teams. Now, here I am. I'm saying that, but I have people on I have people in my church. They're on sometimes 3, 4, 5 different teams. But I can guarantee you that if I'm not being proactive as a leader, and all of us as leaders aren't being proactive in monitoring this and setting those boundaries, giving them permission to say no, or maybe even saying no on their behalf if we see that they're going to flame out both in the kingdom work, but also personally and spiritually, then my goodness, what are we going to do? We've got to make sure that we're just making sure that they're able to do just a few ministries really, really well. What do we do? As we close this time together, and again, this is just an experiment on Periscope, and I appreciate all of you who may have joined in, but we have to realize that Jesus, when He left, He realized, and we need to realize that we can't do it alone. That's why He sent the Spirit to be able to help us. But He's also sent the Spirit and has gifted us to be able to do certain things. And the ideal would be to help everyone to be able to understand where their gifting is and to be able to unleash them to serve in that particular way that is conducive to their gifting. If they're outside of that gifting, it's going to be a chore, and their spiritual tank is going to get empty. But if they're serving in a place that is a passion of theirs, and they're able to serve in a place that's of their gifting, then my goodness, they're going to be energized. And if they're just doing 1 or 2 things that are in that gifting, not 1,000 different things, but 1 or 2 things that are in their gifting, you may be able to have them for a longer period of time. But also, God has also provided a Sabbath rest for us, not just on Sundays, but I believe He wants us to take periods away to where we can rest. We've actually recognized this with our small groups that we started on Sunday nights. We go 3 months on, and then we take 1 month off. And we're just getting ready to start this 1 month off. We just started these Connect groups back in June, but we're getting ready to do the 1 month off. Why? Because people need to be replenished, and they need to be filled back up, and that way we can relaunch things again, and it can be new again and fresh again, and they're ready to go, not only learn the Word, but also to be able to connect in these outreaches again. Now, I'm just a simple pastor that's serving in a church in Colorado, and I don't want to see any of our people, and I don't want to see any of our leaders burned out. So you just make sure that you find a place that you're able to say yes to the things that you can. I know sometimes if you're the main leader, then there may be ways where you're maybe serving outside of your gifting. Well, get some help on that. And whether it's in the office or get some training on it, read some books on it, just fill yourself up to where you're able to move forward with that. And if God is able to bring, and I believe He can, bring someone else to where they can fill in those gaps for you, then praise the Lord. How wonderful is that? But also, just be sure you take advantage of those Sabbath rests as much as you can. You may think you're indispensable, but you're not. And one day, if you're not taking those rests and you're not following in your gifting, then not long from now, what's going to happen is people are going to find out that you are dispensable because you're not able to continue on. Your tank is empty. And it's very difficult, as Wayne Cordero wrote in his book, Leading on Empty. In fact, here's the book right here. I really recommend this book if you're struggling with that. If you're leading on empty, then you're not going to be much good to yourself. You're not going to be much good to your ministry. And you're not going to be much good to your community. And we need you. So avoid that black hole of burnout. Thanks so much for listening. This was an experiment. And again, I appreciate you hanging in there. If there's any way that I can pray for you, you just be sure that you let me know. Go to drmattperry.com. It's a great way for you to be able to connect and contact me. God bless you.